Okay, now that you've had a chance to answer some of these questions yourself, let's go over them the way that I see them and the way that I interpret this chapter. So here's an image, by the way, of what these marriages look like. Obviously, they are very big, very expensive, particularly if you can afford it. If you're an upper class man and women like to marry, use hypergamy to raise the status of themselves and their family. But it's the man's family's responsibility to pay for these really extravagant weddings, and this is what they look like. Now, arranged marriage is considered the correct path to marriage, path to intimacy in this culture. Family marriage policy, however, does not only focus on economic and social status of the partner, as we saw in, say, Korea in the 1900s, where that was pretty much the only consideration that people really cared about, where parents kind of controlled their children's intimate lives with an iron fist. Instead, social factors, cultural factors are, or I'm sorry, social and economic factors are important, but it was also important to match the character of the couple, their attitudes towards life, their values, and help to ensure that they create a strong bond. So this wasn't just about social status or about economics, but it was also about this is the legitimate cultural way to achieve a long lasting intimacy. That was the point more than anything else. So, what do you think, though? We tend to think about arranged marriage as generally being companionate based. That is the generalization. But this particular example brings up a situation where if the arrangement has to do with making sure that people feel strong emotional bonds towards each other, is this companionate or romantic love? Is it holding one as being more important than the other? What do you think after reading this chapter? So they have a nikah, marriage culture and change. They have this nikah ceremony. There are two primary acts of the nikah marriage ceremony. The first one is the exchange of the bride for bride wealth. This usually takes place immediately after the wedding. And then where the bride and the groom meet only after the completion of the nikah and performed by the bride's bedchamber by imam. This is also when the marriage, how do you say, I'm going to have to delete this part. This is when the marriage is consummated. That's the word. This is also when the marriage is consummated. Now, traditionally, this would take place in this culture around 40 days after the wedding. So this gives couples a chance to get to know each other a little bit better. This is very also different than the South Korean ceremony, where the marriage would typically be sort of forced to be consummated directly after the marriage, directly after the wedding. This gives the couples time to get used to each other and to build up some sort of relationship before taking the relationship to a sort of physical level. So yeah, I've got this quote from page 153. In earlier times, this ritual was delayed until the 10th day after the marriage ceremony, although sometimes it was the 40th day. Nowadays, this is also the day of the ritual reconciliation of the bride and groom, which allows them to engage in sexual intercourse. Till the early 1970s, this rite, which brings the marriage process to a close, did not take place until 40 days after the marriage ceremony. But this is starting to change. This is starting to, even among arranged marriages, this is starting to become earlier and earlier. This is what that marriage ceremony looks like in South Korea, this top left image. This is a traditional tea ceremony, which would happen immediately after the wedding. These days, they actually do a Western style ceremony. They do a Western bride wearing a white gown and the man wearing a tuxedo style wedding, and then they, with all their friends and a big group of people out there, group of people spectating. But then they would go and have a private tea ceremony with just the groom, the bride, and their immediate families. And so they sort of do a hybrid these days with both of these things happening, one in public and one in private. And then this is what a nikah with an imam might actually look like among the Makazar. So let's contrast some of these features with self-made marriages. So, self-made marriages often involve elopement. And this is considered socially deviant behavior. Not only is it socially deviant, but it's also considered dangerous. Elopers are sometimes killed. But this is relatively rare. They talk about elopements actually happening fairly frequently, not that much less often than really arranged marriages. Elopements are pretty common. And this is, considered dangerous, but it's more socially dangerous than physically dangerous because it threatens the honor of the entire family. One of the main reasons for these elopements is that the woman is going to marry somebody who is of lower social status. This is very taboo. Lower social status than themselves. And sometimes it's because she's gotten pregnant outside of wedlock and they need to elope very quickly to get married to legitimize the pregnancy. So this threatens the honor of the entire family, especially true when the elopers violate central marriage taboos. A woman marrying a man of much lower social rank, which I just said, sometimes the eloper is considered dead to the family. And this is more common than actual physical violence, but physical violence does take place. Sometimes this can be a lifelong banishment, and the man must still pay the bride's price for taking the bride away, even if they elope. Now, when you look at this in actuality, most people don't have threat of violence threatened against them. Most people do not end up being considered socially dead. These are sort of extreme examples of what can happen with elopement. But a lot of people elope, and the person might be banished from the family and not talked to or sort of shunned for a couple of weeks, a couple of months. But eventually, the family usually reconciles and gets over it, and the eloped marriage is sort of legitimized. So this makes it clear that the papasiama, I'm sure I'm saying that wrong. I'm not familiar with Indonesian, but I'm sure I'm saying that wrong. This makes it clear that this ritual is a form of ritual legitimization and empowerment of a couple's sexuality. According to dominant beliefs, elopement is not the outcome of intense feelings or deep affectional bonds between two people, but of mainly sexual attraction or magical factors. Remember that with arranged marriage, there's very little, sexuality they're discussed in an arrangement. So they're taking into account when they're arranging marriages things like economic and social factors, but also how good of a match for companionate marriage or romantic marriage the two people are. They're not taking into consideration how sexually attractive they are or to each other, how attracted they are, how good their sex life is going to be or something like that, right? So they imagine that the elopers are running away with each other because they have strong romantic feelings for each other, perhaps, or strong sexual feelings for each other, and these are both sort of taboo to be expressed. But the ritual legitimizes that. This is another way for people to get married that is not the correct way, but it is socially deviant, but it's becoming less and less socially deviant over time, and it's becoming just another way that people go about getting married. So the symptoms in this culture of romantic, passionate love are actually considered an illness. And we've talked about this earlier in class, the way that illness is often culturally variable. We don't tend to think about it that way in the United States, but illness is culturally variable. We tend to think that romantic, passionate feelings for somebody, that is restlessness, sleeplessness, maybe hyperactivity, neglecting other aspects of social life because you're so infatuated with one person. There's nothing wrong with that, we think. It's not like you need to take a pill or something, maybe just concentrate a little bit more. But in their culture, they think this is really bad. You should have arranged marriage and create this long-lasting, enduring, companionate type of marriage. But that's bumping into a desire of some people in this group of people in this culture to have romantic and sexual desires for other people and to get married for those reasons. And people can do that, but they have to elope and they have to do this slightly socially deviant way of getting married. So in conclusion, a closer inspection reveals that what seem to be two competing models of love are really just different ideas about which is the best path to conjugal love, harmony, and intimacy. When it comes to what constitutes a loving marriage and what characterizes deep and close bonds between partners, in contrast, there is scarcely a divergent opinion. So everybody in this culture seems to, when you read the second half of this chapter and you get to actually hear from Macazarians about their culture and about how they got married either through arranged marriage or through elopement, they don't really have divergent or different opinions on what kind of love they should have. It's just, or what kind of marriage is best. It actually just what the best path to that style of relationship is. Should your parents choose somebody for you that is you have strong connection with, that has similar hobbies, similar interests, similar personalities, or should you fall in love with somebody either because they're very sexually attractive or because you just have a very strong romantic infatuation with them? Both seem to produce good marriages sometimes. Both seem to produce bad marriages sometimes, and maybe that's why the culture can't really decide on which path is correct. But for now, there is one legitimate and one sort of less legitimate, but both perfectly reasonably acceptable to most people ways to get married. So Makassar agree on what their ideal love is, but disagree on the best way to achieve it. So speaking about magic, we're going to be in our next video talking about Trobriand Island fission magic, and we'll get to talk a little bit more about magic and anthropology, magic and religion, anthropology and religion in the next video.